At some point in your life, someone told you that you weren't built for this. And maybe it was a teacher, your boss, or just that quiet expectation of society. And the worst part isn't that they said it. The worst part is actually that some part of you actually believed them. And we all remember Kung Fu Panda as a hilarious DreamWorks animation about a clumsy panda who accidentally became a martial arts master. Now it's easy to look at Jack Black jokes and just to see the classic underdog comedy. But let's strip away the humor, because this movie is actually a devastating psychological documentary. I think it's a brutal study of what happens when you spend your entire life internalizing the idea that you are fundamentally inadequate. Because the most terrifying villain in this movie isn't the snow leopard named Tai Lung. It's the voice inside Poe's own head that confirms every doubt anyone has ever planted in him. Now, to understand what is actually happening to Poe, we have to look at who he is before the universe drops him into the Jade Palace. Now, he is a waiter at his father's noodle restaurant. He unconsciously conforms to the role of the lovable, clumsy fool, completely suppressing his true desires.
Sorry, Dad.
He calls himself a big fat panda before anyone else can. Now, we usually look at these self-deprecating humor as a sign of humility. But here's the thing about the people who laugh at themselves first. Now, it isn't the confidence, it's the preemptive surrender. Ever joked about your own flaws just to get a laugh? Well, this familiar dance of self-deprecating humor is actually a subtle armor. It's the preemptive strike against imagined rejection, built entirely on the shaky foundation of low self-esteem. Now, we wield it as a shield, hoping to disarm others before they can strike, but in doing so, we wound ourselves far more deeply. Research indicates that self-talk directly influences our perception of ourselves. Now, when we disparage ourselves, our brains subconsciously take in what we're saying as an absolute fact. So when you jokingly call yourself an idiot, your subconscious doesn't get the joke. It just files it away as a data point. And there is a dark psychological underbelly to this kind of comedy. Now, a decade-long study by psychologist Samuel Janus found that almost 80% of professional comedians had experienced traumatic childhoods. Now, they learned to be funny because being funny was safer than being vulnerable. Now, this is exactly what Poe is doing. He is using comedy to mask a deep psychological dependence on comfort eating. Now, when Master Oogway finds himself under the peach tree of heavenly wisdom, Poe's mouth is literally stuffed with food, and Oogway says,
I understand. You eat when you are upset.
And Poe tries to deflect with humor, but the armor finally cracks. He drops the jokes and delivers one of the most painfully honest lines in the film.
I probably sucked more today than anyone in the history of Kung Fu, in the history of China, in the history of sucking.
Because laughing at yourself hurts a lot less than watching others confirm what you already fear. But it does get worse, because that armor that you built to protect yourself eventually becomes the exact thing that suffocates you. Okay, let's rewind to the inciting incident of the movie. Now, in the desperate bid to just see the naming of the Dragon Warrior, Poe straps himself to a chair covered in firecrackers. He launches himself over the wall and crashes directly in front of Master Oogway's pointing finger. Now, Oogway insists that there are no accidents and that the universe has decided Poe is the Dragon Warrior. Now, this is the ultimate fantasy, right? You are plucked away from this obscurity and told you are destined for greatness, but Poe's immediate reaction is pure panic. He literally exclaims, I think there's a mistake. Everyone seems to think that I'm the Dragon Warrior. Now, he is objectively chosen. He's standing in the center of the arena, and he cannot accept it. And I don't think this is just a character flaw. It's a perfectly documented behavioral health phenomenon. And in 1978, psychologists coined the term Imposter Syndrome. Now, it describes high-achieving individuals who, despite verifiable evidence of their success, fail to internalize their accomplishments. They experience pervasive feelings of self-doubt and constant apprehension of being exposed as a fraud. And if you think that this is a rare feeling, let's look at the stats. Because in 2025, a meta-analysis published in the BMC Psychology reviewed 30 studies with over 11,000 people. They found that the global prevalence of imposter syndrome is a staggering 62%. Now, that means more than half the people you know are walking around terrified that someone is going to realize they don't belong in that room. Now, Poe is a textbook definition of the syndrome, and the Jade Palace does everything in its power to confirm his worst fears. And even Master Shifu immediately tries to dispatch Poe by ridiculing him into quitting. Now Shifu looks at him and delivers the ultimate verdict.
How did I do?
There is now a level 0.
The Furious Five mocking his incompetence. Tigress looks him dead in the eyes and says,
You don't belong in the Jade Palace.
"You don't belong in the Jade Palace." Every single voice of authority in Poe's new life is telling him that his internal narrative is correct. Now this triggers a complex neurobiological reaction, and at the heart of our experience of insecurity lies the amygdala, an almond-shaped structure deep within the brain. And when we feel insecure, the amygdala becomes hyperactive, triggering physiological responses that prepare us for a threat. Now when Tigress insults Poe, his brain isn't just processing words, it's processing a survival threat to his identity. And this ties into what psychologists call the self-discrepancy theory. Now it explains the massive psychological gap between our actual self and our ought self. Now the ought self is who we think we should be, based on the expectations of our culture. Now Poe thinks he's ought to be a warrior with claws, wings, or venom. And then he looks at his actual self, which is a soft, clumsy panda, and this discrepancy creates that crippling shame. And now this leads to the most devastating moment in the entire franchise. Poe finally confronts Shifu, screaming that Shifu never believed in him. Now Shifu demands to know why Poe hasn't left yet, and Poe delivers a line that should absolutely shatter anyone who has ever hated themselves.
I stayed because every time you threw a brick at my head or said I smelled, it hurt, but it could never hurt more than it did every day of my life just being me.
Now let that sink in, because Poe didn't stay to prove his haters wrong. He stayed because he actually agreed with them. He stayed because he believed he needed to be fundamentally changed. He thought that being himself was a punishment so unbearable that even Shifu's physical cruelty was a better alternative. Now this is the trap of the fixed mindset. Now Poe believes his core identity is a flaw that must be eradicated. Every person who has ever been told they weren't enough has spent years searching for the secret ingredient that would finally make them worthy. But what if it was never missing? Because this entire plot of this movie revolves around the legendary Dragon Scroll. Written by Oogway, it supposedly contains the secret to limitless power. Now it's the ultimate external validation. It is the promotion, the degree, the marriage, the bank account. It's the magical thing outside of yourself that will finally prove to the world that you are enough. But the movie gives the audience the ultimate answer before the scroll is even opened. And it doesn't come from the Kung Fu master, it comes from the goose who makes noodles.
Come here. The secret ingredient is nothing.
Poe's father, Mr. Ping, finally pulls Poe aside to tell him the secret ingredient to his famous noodle soup. Now he leans in and says, "Nothing. There is no secret ingredient." And his father explains, to make something special, you just have to believe it's special. So when Poe finally earns the right to open the Dragon Scroll, the climax isn't a magical power-up. Because he opens it, and it's blank. It does nothing but reflect his own face back at him. By its very lack of content, emptiness is a symbolic of limitless potential. Now the scroll is blank because the person holding it is already enough. There is no secret ingredient, and there is no external validation that can fix an internal wound. And this is where we have to look at the dark mirror of this story, Tai Lung. 20 years earlier, Shifu trained Tai Lung and told him he was destined to be a dragon warrior. Tai Lung is what happens when we need external validation, goes completely unchecked. He was told he was enough, and when the universe denied him the scroll, he broke everything in a narcissistic rage. Now Poe was told he wasn't enough, and when he believed it, he almost destroyed himself. Now both characters were wounded by the same exact thing. They both placed the source of their identity in the hands of someone else. When Tai Lung finally gets the scroll during their final battle, he opens it and screams in disbelief. He screams, "It's nothing."
It's nothing!
And Poe looks at him with this incredible quiet empathy and says, "It's okay. I didn't get it the first time either." Because Poe was prepared to see himself. And when Tai Lung attacks him, screaming that Shifu didn't teach him these techniques, Poe simply replies, "Nope, I figured it out." Now he isn't fighting as the dragon warrior he was supposed to be. He's fighting as himself. Using his weight, his love of food, his clumsiness, he turns the very things he hated about himself into the exact tools that save the valley. Now here is what the blank scroll doesn't mean. It doesn't mean the pain wasn't real, and it doesn't mean that the rejection didn't land. it means the rejection was never the final verdict. Now, we watch these movies and walk away with a cheap motivational high. We want to believe that finding our inner strength will make years of self-doubt magically vanish. But that's not how the human psychology works, because being told that you aren't enough leaves a permanent mark. It rewires your amygdala, and it builds a monster in your mind that constantly whispers about your inadequacies. You just don't forget the years you spent wishing you could be anybody else. Poe's journey doesn't erase his childhood of hating his own reflection, but it does change what he does with that reflection. Now, the tragedy of the imposter syndrome isn't that you feel like a fraud. It's that you spend so much time and energy trying to become someone else that you completely abandon the only person you were actually meant to be. You cannot be remade into an apple or an orange. You will always be a peach, but you can choose to nurture it. Now, the world is incredibly loud, and it's obsessed with telling you exactly what you lack. It wants you to buy the armor, to laugh at yourself first, to stay in the level 0 training hall of your own mind. But the scroll is still blank. Guys, it's always been blank. It was never going to give you anything you don't already have, and neither will anyone else's approval. So the next time you look in the mirror and you hear the echo of every person who ever told you that you weren't enough, let them be wrong, because you are.